Welcome back, welcome back. Well, here in the UK, as you may know, we're right in the middle of a fascinating election campaign. Fascinating for the most part because of a sudden surge in support for the third party here, the Liberal Democrats, and their leader, their young leader, Nick Clegg. The huge boost in support came 1 week ago, straight after Britain's first ever TV election debate. Well, last night saw the second debate, and everyone is wondering whether Mr. Clegg's bubble has now burst or is expanding or what. Certainly the instant polling after the clash scored the leaders much closer this time, though Mr. Clegg, as the underdog, again did remarkably well. So, what does it all mean? Well, who better to tell us than the former leader of the Liberal Party, Lord David Steele. David, top of the day to you. What was your reaction to last night's TV skirmish?
I agree with what you just said. I think it was very much more evenly balanced between the three performers than it was the first time round. And that wasn't because Nick Clegg was any less good than he had been the first time. It was just that the other two had learnt some lessons, I think, and had upped their game. So they were much more evenly matched. In the very first debate, Nick Clegg was way out ahead by every survey that was done. And I said before the first debate that if he was just as good as the other two, if he got just the same level of appreciation, that would be a great advance. Because, of course, in my time as party leader and my two successors as well, we never got the chance of that kind of exposure equal to the others. And so he only had to show that he was as good as these two to win, really. And he's done that very successfully now in two programs.
And how are you feeling about the future of your party at this moment, or is everything up for grabs at the moment?
I think everything's up for grabs. It's very difficult to translate even these good poll figures into actual seats. And it's confounded all the pundits because nobody is now able to predict what the outcome is going to be, beyond saying that it looks increasingly likely that we will have what some people call a hung parliament, which I prefer to call a balanced parliament. In other words, it's not clear that either the Labour or Conservative Party is going to secure an overall majority because of the number of Liberal Democrats that there will be. And therefore it looks as though we may be heading towards a coalition government, something which is quite normal in many parts of Europe, but which is unusual for us here in the UK.
And does the idea of the magic word coalition fill you with joy, excitement, or terror?
Yes, I think it would be a great challenge for all the party leaders, frankly. They're going to have to live with a new kind of regime. I'm actually speaking to you from Edinburgh, and of course up here in Scotland we've been used to that because we have a proportional system of election, and we had two parliaments in which we had a coalition and a third parliament in which we have a minority government. And it's worked perfectly well. So it looks as though that is going to spread to the rest of the UK, and it's certainly very necessary that the new government, if it's a coalition government, gets to grips with the terrible financial crisis that we have still on our hands, as well as dealing with the reform of our political institutions.
And there, of course, the Liberal Democrats have an important figure in Vince Cable in the field of doing something about the economy, including confidence, of course.
Absolutely. I think that before the election ever started, Vince Cable had a level of public appreciation on financial matters well ahead, for example, of the Conservative Treasury spokesman, George Osborne, in whom nobody has much confidence. And so he was, if you like, a key element in our success before the election ever started. So no longer can the Liberal Democrats be written off as a one-man band, as they sometimes were in my day, and indeed in Paddy Ashdown's and Charles Kennedy's. I think it's very much a team headed by Nick Clegg, and an impressive team at that.
And in terms of things like as we were talking earlier on about hung parliaments, balanced parliaments or whatever, do you think that causes a judder of fear at various moments among the British psyche, that it will be chaos and mayhem? And
well, Well, that is certainly the line being put about, particularly by Mr. Cameron and his colleagues. The Conservative Party is trying to put the frighteners on people about not having an overall majority. But on the other hand, there's quite a lot of suggestion among the polling evidence, particularly among young people, who say, well, you know, have we done so brilliantly with just the single-party government alternating between the other two over the years? Could we not have a better political arrangement with more than one party operating in government? So it swings and roundabouts. There is some anxiety, but there is also a good deal of excitement and anticipation that maybe it'll lead to a new style of politics.
Earlier on, back in 1974, you were instrumental in preventing your then leader stepping up into coalition. Would you warn Mr. Clegg that there are more problems in a coalition for the leader of the third party than there are opportunities, or is that a staid old view?
I have had one long conversation with Nick Clegg on this before the election started. He asked me to come and talk to him about the experience of the past. The reason, of course, we couldn't form a coalition in February '74 when Ted Heath invited my predecessor as leader of the Liberal Party into talks was that when you added the small number of Liberal MPs we had then, it was only about a dozen, add them to the Conservatives, there still wasn't a majority. So it would have been a very, very weak coalition. It's quite different now when you have, at present, 66 Liberal Democrat MPs with the prospect of many more. You've got a serious third block of members added to whichever of the other parties you're talking about would make a stable majority. And in 1977, when the Callaghan government had lost its majority, we had not a coalition, but we had a parliamentary agreement which provided a stable majority. And during that period of about 15 months, the economic factors were in our favour. We got inflation down, the pound rose on the markets, mortgage rates were lower. So we have had some evidence already in our current political history that a balanced parliament can be made to work.
And those rousing words of yours, David, back in 1981 to your MPs and candidates and so on, to prepare for government, go back to your homes and prepare for government. You wouldn't suggest that Nick Clegg goes quite as far as that, would you?
Well, of course, I was arguing at that time for our participation in government. I wasn't saying we were going to be the government. And of course, that was at a time when our poll ratings were even much higher than they are now. And it was all changed, of course, by the Falklands War and the complete obliteration of British domestic politics. But I think the challenge now is to see how the Liberal Democrats could make a positive contribution to the future government. Now, Nick Clegg, of course, is still arguing, quite rightly, that he's on the same plane as the other two, and he would like to be Prime Minister. Well, that's a long shot, but it's not impossible.
Thank you very much indeed, David, on that not impossible note. And now from the political world to the financial world, which is once again making the headlines, with three major stories in recent days. Last week, the Wall Street powerhouse Goldman Sachs was accused of fraud in a civil lawsuit filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US. This week, the IMF proposed two new worldwide taxes on financial institutions to prevent taxpayers from having to bear the costs of future bank bailouts. And now, today, and this is really stop-press news, Greece has accepted emergency IMF funding for a rescue plan. Three huge stories, but which is the most significant? I'm joined now by Oxford University economist Linda Yu. Which would you pick as the most important there?
I think in many ways the IMF proposed bank tax is the most far-reaching. So the Goldman Sachs fraud story is very important as an indication of the depth of this financial crisis and how little we don't know about what happened in these complicated deals. And of course, Greece is very important for the future of the euro. But the IMF proposals can fundamentally change the banking system. And I would probably pick that one amidst three really important stories.
How would it change the system fundamentally?
It has the potential of creating a self-insurance fund for all major banks in the world. And there is a second tax, which to many of the banks is actually the more fundamental one, which is a tax on all of their profits and so their wages that they pay to their bankers. So this is a new tax intended to curb a lot of what they would be considered to be their profit-driving activities, which is trading. So I think between the two of them, it may be this could fundamentally change the banking system, but I think what it also shows is it may actually just be the tip of the iceberg, because President Obama has other proposals that go even farther.
And what about the Goldman Sachs situation, the fraud there? How will that eventually be decided, do you think? Not that your verdict is final, you know, yes. I'm not suggesting, but...
This one may come down to who said what when, because the alleged fraud that they did was by misleading some of their customers as to the intentions of another one of their customers, a hedge fund called Paulson, so the allegation is Goldman wasn't completely forthright. They'd misled some of their clients to think that Paulson wanted the complicated CDOs that they were selling to grow in value, but actually Paulson was shorting the very same thing. The only way to prove this is going to have to be paper trail and who said what. And so I don't know what the ultimate verdict will be, but I do know it just points to how complicated and opaque these transactions are. And now even the US regulator is beginning to think we need to get to the bottom of some of these deals.
And one last question about Greece, the third topic we were going to touch on. What's going to happen there? I mean, is it coming right yet?
I think Greece is in a very difficult position now. They had hoped that because the Eurozone had come together with the IMF to give them a safety net, saying that we will stand behind Greece, that Greece could go then to capital markets and refinance their debt and borrow money normally on markets. That hasn't happened. Now it looks as if Greece's situation is so precarious, its economy is still shrinking, there are still problems with their numbers, so the level of their debt is still not known. It's completely panicked markets, and the amount of interest Greece now has to pay on 2-year bonds is an astounding 10%. They cannot borrow at these rates and stay solvent, which is why they will go now to, certainly they will have to take the money from the IMF, from the Eurozone, and hope that tides them over. But Greece's problem is much more long-standing. Even this money is not enough to tie them over for more than a year. So unless something fundamentally changes in the way that Greece reports its figures and structures its debt, Greece is going to be in trouble in a few years down the line as well. And of course, what this means for the euro, that's a really tough question. That's why the Eurozone are standing behind Greece.
Well, we'll get into that next month. Linda, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dave. In
a minute, I'll be joined by one of the most exciting and delightful and amusing movie directors working today, Gurinder Chadha, after this break.